Of all the quests in Runescape, the Underground Pass is my favorite. When I first completed it, the labyrinthine tunnels and narrow walkways reminded me of some caves I explored with my father a year earlier in New Mexico. Although these caves held no maddening whispers or evil tyrants, they still required you to descend down a narrow path for hundreds of feet, with plenty of spots for you to reenact your many falls in-game. After a decent while, the air would become almost cold, and you would eventually enter a giant room filled with enormous spires of rock that were well over 100 feet tall. I was told that the cave system stretched on for hundreds of miles, all unexplored, and there were many points where you could look over a narrow causeway and peer down into a black void with seemingly no bottom. However, I promise that this isn't all just memories and nostalgia. The Underground Pass is an old quest. It's a long and lonely quest, but why is it the best in Runescape? There are three aspects which will highlight the best this quest has to offer. The first is the structure of the quest itself, as it relates to how your character progresses from beginning to end. Next is the physical layout of the pass itself. And finally, the story. Although dark and brutal, it is one of the most unique in the entire game. Quests in games or in life are really just a task that needs completion. If your boss gives you a project for you to complete, he is giving you a quest. You want to climb Mount Everest? That is a quest that you complete the moment you reach the summit of Mount Everest. RuneScape quests are no different. Pick any quest and it will start with a singular directive. Slay the Dragon of Crandor. Free the town of Port Phasmates from their curse. But while most quests have a single final objective, the path towards completion requires completing many smaller goals. In Dragon Slayer, before you can go to Crandor to slay the dragon Elvarg, you need to talk to the Duke for the shield, claim the 3 parts of the map, and find a ship and a captain to take you to the island. This happens with most quests in RuneScape. You are given a kind of laundry list of things that need checking off before you can access the final goal. Just look at the quest One Small Favor to see a quest that does this to an absurdly self-aware level. The Underground Pass operates differently. The final goal of the quest is given at the start, and it remains throughout. The goal is simple: find a way through the mountain pass. What unfolds then after you start the quest is not a list of things that need completion, but a gauntlet of discovery, and for many players, frustration. Since many players use quest guides nowadays, they might not often open their quest logs, but if you opened your quest log for the Underground Pass, you would probably find it remarkably unhelpful. It often just says vague things like, I need to push deeper into the caves, or I need to find 3 objects of light. Have you ever done a quest in this game using a guide, and as you were following the instructions, thought to yourself, how would anyone figure this out without a guide? This quest has many moments like that, from destroying the orbs, killing the unicorn, and finding the book in the witch's house. Not to mention navigation through the pass is often discovered by trial and error, at least without a guide. The Underground Pass was a quest that was added in 2003, when the game was still considered RuneScape Classic. That makes it one of the older locations in the game, and because of that, it operates under a purely dark fantasy aesthetic. Dungeons, spikes, skulls, demons, giant spiders, and a mysterious evil villain that whispers to you. There isn't much joking around in this quest. This is long before the puns of Recipe for Disaster, and even the first Monkey Madness wouldn't come out for another almost 2 years. Although both of these are amazing quests in their own right, they are lighthearted in nature, and I suspect the designers took the game in this direction when they found out that the majority of their players during the surge in popularity the game received in the 2005 to 2007 era were young children. When RuneScape was still RuneScape Classic pre-2004, you can tell the content wasn't really developed with a younger audience in mind. When you exist in this type of world, One of the most poignant feelings is isolation. Dark fantasy worlds are great at making you feel alone. And you could probably easily think of some games that utilize this feeling well. This quest does this through several avenues. The first we already touched on being the setting. The Underground Pass is a dismal place. Probably more dismal than anywhere in Gielinor. It doesn't have the bustle and action of the God Wars dungeon or the player population of the wilderness. It's just a lonely place. A place where Ivan captures adventurers or anyone foolhardy enough to brave the pass and subjects their minds to nothing short of psychological torture by whispering to them until they become mindless shells. If you talk to the slaves in the cells early on in the quest, they speak to you about various macabre things, like loving the smell of burnt flesh and drinking blood. The most interesting being a mishmash of lines from Hamlet and Macbeth, and one that offers some foreshadowing about strangling the danger inside of you, which might reference the strangled dove the witch Cardia used to bind the doll of Ivan. To Ivan, purity and innocence is dangerous. The second avenue which the quest achieves its feelings of isolation is in the design of the pass itself. When I compared my experiences in the vast caves of New Mexico to the quest, I was referencing the feeling of verticality. The caves felt infinite in depth, and knowing you are so far below the ground can be claustrophobic and isolating. Dungeon crawler games are pretty notorious for this concept. You will start at the ground level and descend downwards, with each level reaching closer towards the Heart of Darkness or whichever prime threat lurks below. It's a simple technique which effectively plays upon some primal fear we all seem to share. And the Underground Pass feels deep. From winding through the tunnels and then descending down the first well after you destroy the 3 orbs, then digging through the prison cell and then onwards towards the final cavernous room, which most players will remember well as they repeatedly fell from the precarious ledges. The sense of verticality inside the pass is more prominent than anywhere else in the game, and with no other players around, it can feel very lonely being so deep down in a hostile place, so far from the sunlit surface. As you are making your way through the pass, you stumble across a unicorn in a cage, and a bit further into the tunnel find 3 knights who have set up camp just outside the final doorway to Ivan's cavernous domain. The knights offer you their food if you're injured, and explain they don't see many friendly faces this deep into the caves. As you continue along, you discover a well stands before the sealed door. Perhaps if you were doing the quest in 2003, you would have puzzled at how you might get through this door. Of course, now most players know that they have to slaughter the unicorn for its horn, as well as kill all the paladins for their badges. You take all these items and cast them into the well. Apparently the well is a well of fire, as the text, when you toss the items inside, read, "You throw the coat of arms into the flames. You hear a howl in the distance." I just want to take a moment to imagine how this scene would play out in a modern game. Imagine if this drama would unfold in a game like The Witcher, and you had to systematically execute 3 knights who kindly offered you their supplies. RuneScape is a game with limited potential to escalate dramatic tension, but this is still one of the most gruesome and violent moments in the entire game. The same game where you chat with goblins about the color of their armor and fight evil monsters made out of jello and cake. The game never asks you to question the morality of this decision, as it is absolutely necessary to advance the quest forward. And so you push on to the final room unperturbed, essentially fulfilling Ivan's whispers of violence and evil that gnawed at the minds of the slaves you encountered earlier. No man or woman will set foot in Ivan's domain with an innocent soul. Only evil ones may tread further, and we may now count ourselves among them. After stepping into one of the largest single rooms in the game, we make our way south and down some steps to reach the ground level of the massive room. It is here we find a small camp of dwarves, who don't seem that evil, so they must have come in a different way. They tell us about Cardia the witch, and that perhaps she has the answers we seek. Once you find Cardia, if you try and speak with her, she will just deal heavy damage to you, and so we'll have to find another means of finding out what she knows. We discover she has lost her cat, and so we retrieve the cat and return it to her, Learning her feline friend has returned, it distracts her enough that we are able to steal a book called The History of Iben and a Small Doll. Reading the book, we discover that Cardia resurrected a black knight named Iben, whose greatest desire was to dominate the minds of others. This makes Iben in many ways a lot like Tolkien's Sauron. Sauron crafted the Ring of Power in order to dominate all life, and domination is the antithesis to freedom. This, of course, reveals that Iben's whispers of freedom were unsurprisingly lies, for freedom was the one thing Iben desired to take from his followers, and it seems that the first step to Iben controlling you is for you to give in to the will of violence. This is evident from the first slaves we encounter, whose mad ravings seem to fetishize violence, to his persistent whispers, and finally our entry into Iben's domain, granted to us only after the slaughter of the 3 knights. It is because of this that I often wondered if the knights we slaughtered were actually not real, and instead some kind of bizarre test set there by Iben or Cardia. Following the descriptions of the book, we learn we have to obtain the 4 elements of flesh, blood, shadow, and conscience. We smear the ashes from Iben's original corpse, the blood of the spider Calrag, and the shadow guarded by the 3 demons onto the doll, and finally go in search of the essence of conscience. We find it amongst the half-soulless ones, their pale white forms bent over inside of cages barely large enough to stand up in. It is inside one of these cages that we find the ashes of the dove that Cardia smothered. After all 4 essences have been applied to the doll, we now make our way to the temple in the center of the cavernous room, and after disguising ourselves as one of the monks, enter the temple and cast the doll down the well, destroying the doll in turn destroying Iben, and thus ending my favorite quest in Runescape. It's been 13 years since I experienced this quest for the first time. Whenever I ended up completing it again on a new account over the years, I was always reminded of the same feelings. It's a piece of the original Runescape before the game had become extremely popular. The feeling of loneliness that permeates the rat and spider-filled tunnels perhaps is heightened by the fact that Jagek's approach towards designing the world of Gielinor changed a few years later. The colors would brighten, and never again would a story so solemn be told in this world. The underground pass now remains mostly out of sight, merely an obstacle to players hurriedly completing the quest that will lead them into the elvish lands beyond. And yet, we did not deal with all the nefarious characters inside the pass. Cardia, the witch who created Iben, remains in her small house, her only companion, the cat we rescued. Will she remain contented with her fallen creation, or does she have some dark plan that has yet to be discovered? Maybe it's best we will never know.